12, I think, by Vidya, who was present for a long period of time.
Thank you very much, Geeta, for that very broad overview of the last several documentas and the positions or the ambitions of the curators and the place that this has in an unfolding story of curatorial ambition is the wrong word, but endeavors, I would say. Geeta is going to be followed now by Vidya Shivdas, well known to all of us as a curator and a critic who lives in Delhi and who works for the Vadera Art Gallery and the Foundation for Indian Contemporary Art. Vidya has curated a number of memorable exhibitions and has also initiated a number of wonderful programs that FICA runs. She's been the recipient of a grant from the Asia Art Archive, looking at the history of art criticism in post-independence India. But today, Vidya is going to speak to us from a position of her long personal engagement, particularly with Documenta 12, where she was selected by the educational department to be part of its programs, and so therefore she was in situ in Documenta, leading a number of the docent tours. Having then made her pilgrimage to at least 3 editions of Documenta, I think Vidya will be very well placed to reflect on the unfolding history of this exhibition. Vidya.
Thank you, MMB and JNU, for hosting this event, and Geeta for conceptualizing this symposium. We're looking at a range of international exhibitions, like Documenta 13 and the ongoing Sharjah Biennale. The discussion is also rooted in the context of our own recently concluded Kochi Biennale, the first Indian Biennale which has been held against so many odds. My brief today is to look at the Documenta 12 and 13, and Kavita and Geeta have already spoken about it, and to share some of the images of work shown there. My connection with Documenta began in 2007 when I was provided a fellowship by the Max Muller Bhavan to spend 4.5 months and work with the Education and Mediation program. Having reached a month before Documenta 12, my first encounter was with the city and the palpable contrast one experienced between non-Documenta Castle, an economically depressed small town with a high migrant population, and Documenta Castle, the international capital of the art world, for 100 days every 5 years. The aesthetics and the economics of one didn't seem to permeate into the other, and small skirmishes surfaced now and then, which happens in every Documenta in the build-up to the exhibition, only to be forgotten once the exhibition rolls out. The curators of Documenta 12 were very concerned with the fact that statistically the exhibition drew a very small percentage of the local population. Only 7% of Castle audiences would make it to the Documenta, and addressed this by setting up an organization called the Bairat, which consisted of 40 local experts who came from different fields and were actually linking up the themes that the exhibition threw up to the local context. I mention this because I think it's important to look at the modes of address adopted by the 2 Documentas, one locating itself within the context of Kassel and Germany, and the other going beyond Kassel to Kabul, Cairo, and Canada. Critical reception seems to have pitched D12 and D13 at 2 ends of the spectrum, one seen as somewhat of a failure, the other a grand success. And yet the 2 Documentas seem to share some common conceptual ground. Like Geeta already explicated, Documenta 12 was investigating the crisis of modernism and looking at the conditions of bare life it had produced, and also thinking of methods of education. So what is to be done now? While the Documenta 13, with its no concept, foregrounded the thematics of collapse and recovery, looking at artistic research as a way of thinking afresh on existing political conditions. For both, the evocation of Documenta 1 became an important reference point to return to that original moment of crisis in post-war Germany, to enter its state of mind, as Documenta 13 curator writes, which did not emerge like other world exhibitions from 19th century trade fairs or world fairs of the colonial period. It emerged after World War II, out of trauma and within a space where collapse and recovery are articulated. The chief architect of Documenta, Arnold Bode, along with Werner Haftmann, located the exhibition within the ruins of the Friedrichshainenmuseum, which is incidentally the first public museum in the European continent. Roger Bruegel, the curator of Documenta 12, writes beautifully about the display, how attention was drawn to the individual character of the artworks, whose fragility corresponded with the patched up body of the building and the existential nakedness of the visitors in 1955. The exhibition had nothing celebratory or official about it. It was an aesthetic act with a vengeance to reconstitute civic society. In the opening room of the Friedrichshainenmuseum, Bode placed reproductions of artworks from across time, and also portraits of artists like Mondrian, Klee, many of whose works had been deemed degenerate by the Nazi regime. The viewers confronted these with a process of identification, constantly moving between the individual and the collective. At Documenta 12, the entrance room was covered with ceiling-to-floor mirrors, but the viewer saw herself as part of a multitude. Given its history, the Friedrichshainenmuseum was used to examine the project of the Enlightenment and to look at, among other things, the failure of the public sphere. Here we have two instances of performances by Czechoslovakian artist Giri Kovanda and Argentinian artist Graciela Carnevale. Kovanda, on the left, performed this simple action of standing on the street with his arms outstretched to make human contact, small acts to force interaction among people who had completely withdrawn in the highly repressed Prague of the 1970s. Carnevale, on the other hand, locked the visitors who came to her exhibition within a gallery, wanting each of them to experience, as she writes, enclosure, anxiety, and finally oppression, and also wanting to see what they would do, how they would react to this enforced enclosure. After an hour of waiting, the glass of the gallery was finally broken, ironically not from inside, but from outside. And we return to look at ourselves in the mirror. The act of art making is finally a political one that allows us to examine the ethics of coexistence. There was a John McCracken sculpture in the foyer of the Documenta 12 in the Mirror Hall, which was also made of mirrors, so it kind of merged into the environment. And you had Ai Weiwei's 1001 antique wooden chairs placed all over the exhibition space, which invited viewers to turn away from the art and speak to each other. The foyer and the front room of the Friedrichshainenmuseum in D13 were left empty, as Kavita has pointed out, and a breeze blew through, which is Ryan Gander's work. It was a clever strategy that worked very well, because one expected to be inundated when entering the Friedrichshainenmuseum, and instead one felt a sense of lightness and play. But it also had sinister undertones of an evacuated building under siege. In one wing, you saw these three sculptures by Julio Gonzalez, which was a throwback to Bode's Documenta 2 of 1959, where they were exhibited. A photograph is placed alongside, showing a man and a woman looking at the work, to that moment of confrontation and reconciliation that Documenta in the 1950s allowed to the audience. The brain was a small section that was tucked away in the back, a treasure trove, an underground bunker, an archaeological site, containing a series of disparate objects. And it really spoke about resilient cultural forms which had an almost forensic appeal, fragments that could piece together a semblance of a civilization. So the Bactrian Princess, and of course Lee Miller's surreal performance of bathing in Hitler's Munich apartment in his bathtub on the day that he committed, and it so happened that he committed suicide on the same day. It was almost like a ritual cleansing of the sins committed. The Nazi camp of Britnau, only 15 kilometers from Kassel, was what Caroline Christoph-Bargev termed as the subconscious of the Documenta 13, a 12th century monastery which was converted into a prison in the mid-19th century, and then a concentration camp by 1940. This history comes through most strongly in the works that are presented at the Hauptbahnhof venue, which was the railway station in Kassel. Canadian artist duo Janet Cardiff and George Burris Miller staged the Alter Bahnhof walk through the station. Fiction and reality combine as one stands on the platforms where the trains deported Jews to the concentration camps. that Birkenau's repressive history didn't end with the war is explored in Clement von Wendermeyer's 3-channel projection titled Muster, which is set in camps, but also in the site's more recent, but also explores the site's more recent avatar as a girls' reformatory space, and also later a psychiatric institution in the 90s. At the Friedrichshainenum, you were confronted with more than 900 postcard drawings of apples and pears, which was made by Corbinian Eigner, a Bavarian village pastor, who was sent and who made these in the concentration camp at Dachau. Another series of work by Jewish artist Charlotte Solomon, who was murdered in Auschwitz at the age of 26, is shown here. The work titled Life or Theater, a Play with Music, is a series of 1,300 gouaches. It is an autobiographical narrative that examines a Jewish woman's life in the face of the rise of Nazism and forced migration and abuse, and really thinks about the question of the challenge of whether to live or die in the face of this. Some of the other works drew parallels between Kabul and Kassel. The trigger was Arte Povera artist Allegro Boiati's journey to Kabul in the 1970s, where he set up the One Hotel. So he went to Kabul and he set up this hotel between 71 and 77, and also collaborated with the local craftsmen to make weave these world maps. This work was also explored by, this intervention of Boiati was also explored by Mario Garcia Torres, who made this the subject of his research. Michael Rakowitz collaborated on a workshop with local students working in the archaeological area of Bamiyan, constituting an inventory of books destroyed in a fire in the Friedrichshainenum. Carved from stone, about 40 life-size medieval books became the symbol of cultural heritage and human life that were destroyed both in Germany and in Afghanistan. And finally, Tacita Dean, who made these chalk drawings in the former tax office in Kassel. The reference for the drawings came from a blind film she commissioned on Afghanistan, asking a camera person to film various locations without actually going there herself. The footage was unusable, but it triggered many images in the drawings, like the flash floods and the rising of the Kabul River every year when the snow melts. He also had the works of Kader Attia, titled Repair, which looked at the idea of cultural reappropriation. Moving between Algiers and Congo, Attia became fascinated with African objects that had been repaired by adding another visible aesthetic to the object. And of course, these didn't fit into the kind of idea of African craft or art. He makes disturbing analogies between these objects placed in vitrines and the deformed faces of European soldiers who were injured in World War I and underwent plastic surgery. So he really looks at the idea of repair. In another work that dealt with reconstruction, American artist and urban planner Theaster Gates took over the dilapidated Huguenot house, which was a bombed out house and a hotel, and had been abandoned since the early 70s. Using the material, and he used materials from other abandoned structures both in Chicago and in Kassel to reclaim this space. With a team of people living on site, the reconstruction resulted in a lived space which was constantly being transformed and also holding performances, dinners, talks. Caroline Christoph Bargev also speaks of the frenetic and the unharmonic choreography that underlies the documenta. And one of the climactic moments that this occurs is with the refusal of time by South African artist William Kentridge, for which he collaborated with the American historian on science Peter Gillison. It centers on the idea of time and the attempts to standardize this in the age of industrial revolution. And it's a mega operatic 5-channel synchronous projections which is filled with theater, drawing, music, dance, and film, where shadow dancers interact with various instruments that reference the measuring of time. Like Lawrence Wiener's conceptual text-based artwork, The Middle of the Middle of the Middle at the Documenta 13, both exhibitions seem to suggest that the fate of human world is tied into concentric circles, which creates a palimpsest of time and space. The circle is cast very far and wide. It makes connections with marginal, forgotten figures, peripheral locations, other historical times, and in each case the return is marked at a different location. One of the strongest links that the Documenta 12 forged was between women artists working from the 1950s to the 70s with the language of abstraction and minimalism. There was Atsuko Tanaka from the Japanese Gutai group, Mira Schendl, a Jewish emigre who had settled in Brazil, Nasreen Mohammadi, of course, Bela Kolarova from Czechoslovakia, who had produced abstract works from domestic found objects, and finally these beautiful chewing gum sculptures of Polish artist Alina Shaposhnikov. Like Sheila Gowda's sculptural installations that flowed unstoppably onto the floor, the wall, webs of connection were spun between these parallel practices and histories across the venue. The other principal venue of Documenta 12, Neue Galerie, constructed itself as a space of alternative histories. It was filled with memories, with loss, with mourning, with collective strength. It addressed the question of silence and the mediation speech is subject to. The space itself was structured with small alcoves and rooms, and this assisted the kind of narratives that were created around the fragility of body, ecology, feminist concerns. And everywhere you saw circles forming. Mary Kelly's nostalgia about the women's movement of the 1970s and really talking to a younger generation about what could be, what kind of movement could there be today, recreated itself with another kind of fury and urgency in Amar Kanwar's lightning testimonies, and in particular the portrayal of the mass demonstration by the elderly Manipuri Imas who were, because of the alleged rape of Manorama by the Indian Army in 2004. Was there a way of reconciling the distance between the individual and the universal? To see, as in this beautiful work by Chilean artist Gonzalo Diaz, the world or art in our own shadow, or would the latter always dissipate or stereotype local individual experiences? It was stating the necessity to hold on and to grapple with this universal imagining without the reduction that occurs in the process. Otherwise, the format of Documenta had no meaning alongside our hope for perhaps a more equal process of globalization. The two exhibitions were very different in scale. Documenta 12 was contained, pedagogical in its format, addressing definitely a more German and even a Kassel audience, while Documenta 13 was large, associative, and working on a kind of much more global and ambitious scale. But both seem to look back in order to grasp the present, in order to find cues on how to grapple with it. What is the current historical moment that causes this re-performance of the past? How is the sense of crisis being played out in different parts of the world? These were some of the questions I was left asking when examining Documenta 12 and 13. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vidya, for that wonderful exposition of the two most recent Documentas. I think your presentation was both poetic and acute, and it's something to savor. We're going to follow now with a panel of three artists here, Jibesh Bakji and Shudubrata Sengupta, as well as Sonia Khurana. Jibesh and Shudu are no strangers to any of us here. Members of the Raqs Media Collective, which started out as a trio of filmmakers, they now straddle a very wide range of practice, including art making and curating. And their work has been shown in an enormous number of prestigious exhibitions. In 2008, they were also co-curators of Manifesta. More recently and closer to home, their project Sarai Reader 9 just concluded at the Devi Art Foundation. Known as much as they are for their art, when you hear them, you'll also see why they are equally regarded for their performance of the spoken word. It's fitting then that the third member of this panel should be a performance artist who can stand up to them. It's Sonia Khurana, who will be able to give them a run for her money. Sonia, as you all know, is a Delhi-based artist known for her work in video and performance. And she will speak of her experience of walking through the recent Documenta, While Jibesh, I think, will query the institutional and economic foundations supporting such a massive edifice, and Shuddho will respond to the monumental book of books that was produced this time. May I ask Sonia to please begin?
Hi everyone, this is nice. Before Shuddho hijacks with the book of books, I'm going to read notes from the notebook of notebooks. The notebook of notebooks. So actually there isn't a notebook, it's an imaginary thing in my, one mental notes one takes. I decided not to show images because it's only 15 minutes. But I actually really, for those of you who've been to Kochi, I want you to recall the work by Ahmad Matar, if that's how it's pronounced, the images of people going to Hajj. Because every time I've been to the Documenta, that's really how I felt. It's really been like a pilgrim, and I think in the pages that I'm going to read, it might become clear the need for an artist to go to a place like the Documenta. So I'm going to read 7 or 8 pages. Page 1. So I wish I could show you the image from Ahmad Matar's work at the recent Kochi Muziris Biennale that depicts the fervor of the pilgrims on Hajj. I want to recall this image as this is how I have seen myself making the journey to Kassel every 5 years over the past 2 decades, desiring, hungry, seeking, artist and spectator. Arriving by plane, train, foot and then by tram, number 6 at the Friedrichsplatz, I am greeted with the sight of the familiar white metal containers that house the ticket windows, books, souvenirs and so on. These have remained unchanged over the past 4 Documentas that I have visited. As a natural starting point for the exhibition, I enter the Friedrichianum building, which is marked by the absence of objects on ground floor. I read the extensive curatorial statement cautiously, since obvious messages always inspire my insubordination. An unseasonal breeze is coursing through the building. This is Ryan Gander's often talked about work called I Need Some Meaning I Can Memorize, The Invisible Pull, 2012. There are few other signs of life as in these large elusive ground floor rooms, reinforcing the underlying idea that this exhibition would hinge on time, space, history, memory and participation. I remain undecided. With the Gander's breeze is a refreshing element that helps clear away preconceived notions, opening up spaces for the spectator, cleansing their palate as they enter into what is to come, or whether it is a potentially annoying conceptual trope. Just then, a door suddenly blows open due to a gust of wind, and as I start towards it, a guard quickly rushes to me, jumps and pulls me away and shuts the door. This, as it turns out, is not part of the artwork. Behind the curatorial display of absences and hauntings, within the Friedrichianum central cranial rotunda is what the curator calls the brain, and I won't elaborate on this, it's been often talked about. A densely choreographed collection of small objects from disparate epochs and cultures, notably a landscape. For me, what was notable was a landscape canvas by Mohammad Yusuf Asifi, who in the 1990s saved more than 80 figurative paintings from the National Gallery of Kabul by covering portions of them in watercolor. Other objects have been already very nicely talked about by Kavita. Well, the objects in the Documenta 13, the majority of these are works of artists, and these are primarily valued, and their presence there is valued for their encoded social, political and cultural relations, even when these are singularly authored. The exhibition seems to approach objects as quasi-subjects, unfolding the histories that have shaped them and that they have in turn shaped. The method is textual, forensic and archaeological. Beyond the jumbled brain, one of Documenta 13's greatest appeals continues to be these wide-ranging selection of objects, artworks and practices of all kinds, rather than those exclusively plucked from the international contemporary and blue-chip gallery scene. Among the incredible sights are the 900 drawings of apples and pears by village pastor Kubinian Ainger, who bred fruit trees while he was imprisoned in a concentration camp for refusing to recognize National Socialism. Elsewhere, technical engineer Konrad Zeuss's watercolors, paintings and machines are simultaneously displayed. In 1936, Zeuss constructed a mechanical brain in his parents' apartment. His discoveries led to the invention of computer. He also created fine but hardly original paintings. Through the display, it is made apparent that Zeuss's truly creative creativity unfolded when rethinking arithmetical concepts and in regards to his machines. Another artwork that is entirely new to me and that left a great impression, which is in the Halle, was the collaborative project by the Korean artists Moon Kwon Wong and Jeon Jun Ho, titled New Forms, News from Nowhere, 2002. Moon and Jun presented a possible vision for the future, the popular post-apocalyptical future, to be more specific. This included disturbing but attractive designs for new lifestyle products, devices for surviving the apocalypse. The beautifully and convincingly crafted objects made of materials that included titanium, brushed aluminium, and industrial ceramics were parts of a hydrodynamic system, a survival kit offering a range of external and internal prosthetic devices that would allow the post-apocalyptic survivor to exist in their new environment by recycling water present in the body. All packed neatly into a shock-proof case, the devices, nasal cavity inserts for moisture retention, the urine concentrator, and the very disturbing renal fecular dehydrator presented an all too plausible solution for future sustainability for a privileged few. Much of the Documenta 13 follows this trend of mixing art and science, the ancient and the futuristic, put on the same level as analytical models of history, of nature, of colonialism, of mortality, and of experience. Page 2. More seems less. More projects, less time, energy, attention. And this in the end is what makes Documenta 13 for me somewhat self-indulgent and inaccessible in equal measure to its many instances of poignancy, sincerity, and brilliance. As a mega archive of projects whose number, duration, and complexity challenge a walking, eating, sleeping visitor's capacity for meaningful interaction, Documenta 13 seems paradoxically both moment-defining and moment-defying. As one can only see it at a rapid pace, one has to take care of the potential hazard that the experience is not quickly reduced to so many slogans or read as one-line curatorial gestures. The director hopes, the director of the Documenta, she has a very long name, I'll just call her the director of the Documenta. The director of the Documenta hopes, where am I? That, and I quote, this obsolete 20th century object, the exhibition, takes on a new life as it mutates into non-commercial spaces to intense aggregate, quote, end of quote. But then she also confesses, quote, truthfully, I am not sure that the field of art will continue to exist in the 21st century, quote, end of quote. Not meaning art itself, I think, but our tidy roping off of the field. To Joseph Beuys's famous dictum of everyone is an artist, Christophe Bacargive adds, so is anything. Not that I'm particularly interested in getting inside the head of the curator, but it seemed evident that Documenta 13 was plainly reflective of a prolific, hyperactive consciousness fixated on moments of trauma at turning point, accident, catastrophes, crisis, events that mark moments when the world changes. Page 3. The helicopter sawing at the sky is getting on my nerves. In a public misery message, a temporary monument to global economic inequality, created by a group called the Critical Art Ensemble, viewers ride in a helicopter to heights corresponding to their net worth. The work is supposedly about wealth accumulation, and is an anti-market gesture. You could either pay $150 or sign up in an online lottery and hope to be chosen to take a ride. The institutional influence of a major international exhibition such as a documenter and how inclusion in it can snowball an artist's career and define that artist as good. And amazingly, art lovers' neural network becomes tuned to it accordingly. But despite the habitual controller, there is always recourse to critical reflection, although it is not especially encouraged in the current art, market-driven approach to fine art. Now, page 4, with all due respect to and consideration to the importance of curating and curators, I have a problem with the overemphasis on curation and curating, and on the overuse of tools of artistic research in Documenta 13. Many of the works on the show, mainly by artists of younger generation, reflect the artistic research model, which has become standard fare at art academics over the last decade. Artistic research has brought forth its own rules and presentations. It is a genre in the true sense, and these rules shaped the exhibition. Secondly, research needs topics. It is extremely and primarily dependent upon discourse. Christophe Bocquart seems to have steered the participating artists through a specific discursive path. They were taken to Bridgenor near Castle, which I think Vidya talked about, a former monastery that was used as a correctional facility and a concentration camp. The artist's attention was also drawn to the historical parallels between Castle and Kabul: war, destruction, totalitarian regimes, rebuilding of a civic society, and from there, it was only a small leap to the destruction of the ecosystem. This discursive channeling created a thematic flood inundating the exhibition as a whole. Now, research is presented via documents, proofs, visual and auditory evidence. These rules have an impact on artistic form. Simply showing is not enough. Extra explanations and commentary are always needed. Thus, a multitude of installations are not really installations in the Documenta 13, since the relationship to the surrounding space is of secondary importance. Installations become mini exhibitions, often with a didactic overkill. The structuring principle of mini exhibitions is additive. In most cases, the same thing is shown and explained in different media, presumably with the hope or in the hope that the amassed knowledge will make a greater impression. Faced with such assemblages, I wonder if gathering knowledge, which is often cited as a way of justifying artistic research, is a suitable category for productive artistic activity, especially when knowledge is reduced to information. Such a practice strikes me as deficient in both aesthetic and intellectual terms, and quite frankly as rather complacent for all the manifest zeal and effort that goes into such works. The production costs are high, artists must travel, collect material and make films, but they often seem to run out of breath before achieving artistic transformation or distillation. Instead, we are presented with a sometimes naive trust in the evidence of what is being shown. And when the artworks are based on homework assigned by a curator, then very little remains of artistic autonomy and independence. And this is a worrying sign of curatorial authority. This being said, it was refreshing to see some artists, especially those who belong to an older generation and went to art school before the paradigm of artistic research emerged as a dominant promising strategy. They remained unimpressed by the curatorial guidelines on discourse and format and paid no heed to the curator's contextual prescriptions. For example, Jimmy Durham, whose work, The History of Europe, is a concise and compelling parody of the research genre. In one vitrine, Durham shows two small objects, a stone, allegedly a Paleolithic tool, and a dysfunctional, never-fired bullet from World War II. In another neighboring vitrine, he has placed 3 pages of text, printed in large type, which cheekily and with a very cheeky and brief history of Europe. Another thing that I felt immediately was that there was a tendency throughout Documenta towards overproduction and the realization of projects that didn't seem to merit what must have required substantial funding. This was most evident in some of the film works, which were excruciatingly and often unnecessarily long, but more than anywhere else, this was evident in the sprawling Karlsau Park. Karlsau, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, unfortunately deprived many artists' works of a connection to place, history, or to one another. There were too many indifferent works occupying prefab, pop-up, white cubes in the park, so much so for stepping out of the gallery. I have read a review by H.G. Masters in Art Asia Pacific, which said that while Documenta 12 looked back at the modern era to ask, with classicist turn of phrase, whether it is our antiquity, Documenta 13 was a Baroque festival of sheer immensity rather than comprehensibility. One fears that what will follow is an exhausted, picturesque era of the Rococo, a mood that was already blooming in the culture. Another thing which bothered me, which I only heard of but wasn't actually present for most of it, but saw some evidence in the works from Afghanistan, is that the workshops, seminars and exhibitions in Kabul and Cairo in particular have raised important and uncomfortable questions about what it means for an institution of Documenta's size and scale to travel. In the world beyond Kassel, the exhibition is an unsettled entity and has yet to prove itself as a model of good and meaningful engagement, capable of relating to communities of artists and curators in their own fragile ecosystems, or able to act gracefully in situations of considerable political upheaval, ambiguity and uncertainty. Inside Kassel, it is not very clear why most of the artists of Afghani descent, even those who live in Europe and America, with the exception of Miriam Ghani, whose video about Kabul's palace was screened at the Friedrichianum, all the other Afghani artists were quarantined together in a former hospital of all the venues. This was unclear on a conceptual level. The decision gave the impression that these artists' work was a special case and not yet ready to stand alongside their international peers, indicating a kind of inherent patronization. Now, I'm running short of time. I really wanted to talk about some works which I totally loved, but also Vidya and Geeta and Kavi have talked about them. I would only mention Wael Shawki, who hasn't been mentioned yet, who I think is worth a mention, and Tacita Dean, but Vidya's spoken about her. Often artists in the exhibitions transpose material from one historically and culturally resonant condition to another, suggesting alternative trajectories, history might have taken or might still take. Wael Shawki's fabulous two-part video cabaret crusade, A Path to Cairo 2012, is part of an ongoing series of animated films begun in 2010 using 200-year-old puppets on strings. Based on Lebanese writer Amin Malouf's The Crusades Told Through Arab Eyes, it's a retelling of the history of the crusade, outlining the political shift and the power struggle amidst major cities and factions. It is a musical performed with old puppets that move through sparse background. The strings are clearly visible. It shouldn't work, but it does. Antique Italian puppets become specific historical protagonists in an ingenious retelling of the First and Second Crusades from an Arab perspective, through subtle shifts in the marionettes' costumes and beautifully crafted sets. I'll skip all the others and come to my last page, which is about dance. Tino Sehgal outlines himself in the darkened ballroom with chanting, singing, dancing, noise-making performers who let you lose the contour of your body and lead you into decaying house, behind the decaying goat house. Performers stand and sing, whisper, holler, and dance. They go through little routines as I stumble between them. Equally exhilarating for me is choreographer Jerome Bell's Disabled Theatre, a confrontational performance made in collaboration with actors with learning difficulties. Both Bell's and Segal's work concerns presence and presentness, what it means to be a spectator. Jerome Bell presents Disabled Theatre with Zurich's Theatre Hora, a company whose members have Down syndrome and other learning disability. The formal and emotional pathos in Jerome Bell's dance, involving people with Down syndrome